The blood-stained letter lay half buried in the dust beside the overturned stagecoach, and Xander Morrison almost missed it as he rode past on his way to Denver. He pulled his horse to a stop, something about the cream-colored paper catching his eye in the fading afternoon light. The stagecoach looked like it had been attacked maybe an hour before, the horses cut loose and driven off, luggage scattered across the dirt road. But there were no bodies, which struck him as strange. Usually when the Taggart gang hit a stage, they left casualties. Xander dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth as he approached the wreckage. The letter was pinned beneath a broken spoke, and when he pulled it free, he noticed the handwriting immediately. It was elegant, feminine, written with care. He unfolded it carefully, noting the spots where water or perhaps tears had smudged some of the ink. The date at the top read July 14, 1876, which meant it had been written just today. His eyes scanned the words, and with each line, his heart began to pound harder. Dear Margaret, I am writing this as we travel because I fear I will not have the courage to speak these words aloud when I arrive. Father has arranged my marriage to Clayton Garrett in Fairplay, Colorado, though I have never met the man. They say he is wealthy, that he owns half the silver mines in Park County, but I do not care for silver or gold. I care only that I am being sold like livestock to a man who collects beautiful things the way others collect stamps. His first two wives both died under mysterious circumstances, and everyone whispers about it, but no one speaks loud enough to stop this wedding. I am frightened, Margaret, truly frightened. If you receive this letter and I do not arrive by week's end, please tell someone what has happened. Tell them to look for Josephine Vale in Fairplay. Tell them I did not go willingly. Tell them I fought. Your loving sister, Josephine. Xander read the letter 3 times, his jaw tightening with each pass. He knew Clayton Garrett by reputation. The man was a snake, powerful enough that most law in Park County turned a blind eye to his dealings. The rumors about his wives were more than whispers among those who paid attention. The first had supposedly fallen down the stairs. The second had taken ill and died within a week, her symptoms consistent with arsenic poisoning, though no doctor would say so officially. He looked at the wrecked stagecoach again, seeing it with new eyes. This was not the Taggart gang's work. This was too clean, too precise. Someone had stopped this coach specifically, and he would bet his last dollar it was on Clayton Garrett's orders. The man would not want his new bride arriving with letters that might expose his plans, letters that might lead to questions. The sun was already sinking toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Fairplay was a hard ride north, maybe 40 miles through rough country. If he pushed through the night, he could make it by dawn. But he did not know this woman, had no stake in her troubles beyond what was written on this piece of paper. He read the letter once more, focusing on the words, I did not go willingly, and I fought. There was courage in those words and desperation, and a plea for help that transcended the fact that it had been written to someone else. Xander had spent the last 5 years drifting, taking odd jobs, trying to outrun his own ghosts. After the war, after losing his family's ranch in Texas to carpetbaggers and corrupt officials, he had not much cared what happened to him. He had been moving through life rather than living it. But this letter, this woman's words, they sparked something in him that he thought had died along with his old life. This was something concrete, something he could actually do. He could not get his family's land back. He could not undo the past. But he could ride to Fairplay, and he could make sure Josephine Vale had at least one person on her side. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket, close to his heart. Then he swung back up onto his horse, a sturdy roan mare named Copper, and turned her north. The road to Fairplay would take him through some rough country, especially at night, but Copper was sure-footed and he knew these mountains well enough. He had worked as a guide in these parts last winter, leading mining expeditions and helping settlers find safe passage. As he rode, full darkness fell across the land. The stars came out in their thousands, so bright and clear this far from any city that they cast actual shadows. Xander kept Copper to a steady pace, not so fast that she would tire or stumble, but fast enough that they ate up the miles. The night air grew cold as they climbed higher, and he was grateful for his heavy coat. His mind kept returning to the letter to the woman who had written it. Josephine Vale. He wondered what she looked like, though he knew it should not matter. He wondered if she was safe right now, or if she was already in Clayton Garrett's clutches. The thought made him urge Copper a bit faster. Around midnight, he stopped to let his horse drink from a stream and to rest for just a few minutes. His own canteen was still half full, and he drank sparingly, knowing he needed to make it last. He chewed on some jerky from his saddlebag, barely tasting it. The moon had risen, nearly full, which made the riding easier but also made him more visible if anyone was watching the road. He thought about Clayton Garrett as he rested. The man had come to Colorado about 6 years ago, right as the silver boom was starting. He had money already, though no one seemed to know where it came from, and he had used it to buy up claims and set up operations quickly. Within 2 years, he was one of the richest men in the territory. Within 4, he was effectively running Fairplay and most of Park County. The law answered to him. The judges were in his pocket, and anyone who crossed him tended to disappear or meet with unfortunate accidents. His first wife, Mary, had been the daughter of a rival mine owner. Within 6 months of the marriage, her father's operations had mysteriously flooded, and he had been forced to sell to Garrett at a fraction of the value. Mary herself had died a year later. The second wife, Catherine, had been from back east, some kind of arrangement through a matchmaker. She had lasted only 8 months before her untimely death. Now Garrett was bringing in a third wife, and from the letter, it was clear Josephine had no idea what she was walking into. Or rather, she knew enough to be terrified but not enough to have escaped. Xander stood, stretching his stiff legs, and looked up at the stars. "What am I doing?" he asked the night sky. "Riding to the rescue of a woman I have never met, planning to go up against the most powerful man in Park County." But even as he said it, he knew he would not turn back, could not turn back. That letter had been a sign, a message meant for someone else but found by him, and he believed in Providence enough to think that meant something. He mounted up again and continued north. The landscape around him was a mix of rocky terrain and pine forests, the road winding through valleys and over ridges. Twice, he startled deer that bounded away into the darkness. Once he heard what might have been a mountain lion somewhere in the distance, but Copper just flicked her ears and kept moving. As the hours passed, and the moon began to sink toward the western horizon, Xander felt the weariness in his bones. He had been on the trail for 3 days before finding the letter, and he had not slept well even then. But he pushed on, the letter in his pocket seeming to burn against his chest, reminding him of his purpose. Dawn was just beginning to lighten the eastern sky when he finally saw Fairplay in the distance. The town sat in a wide valley, surrounded by mountains, the Arkansas River running nearby. It had grown considerably since the last time he had been through, 2 years ago. There were more buildings now, more mine operations visible on the hillsides, more signs of wealth and industry. He rode straight through the waking town, getting his bearings. The main street was already showing signs of activity, shopkeepers opening their doors, workers heading to the mines. He needed information, Needed to know where Clayton Garrett lived, whether Josephine had already arrived, what the situation was. But he also needed to be careful. If Garrett controlled the town as thoroughly as reputation suggested, asking the wrong questions to the wrong people could tip the man off. He spotted a small hotel at the end of the main street, the kind of place that catered to traveling miners and tradesmen rather than wealthy mine owners. He rode to the livery stable next door, where a young man was just opening the doors. "Need to board my horse," Xander said, dismounting. "And I need information discreetly." The young man, who could not have been more than 18, looked him over carefully. "Information costs." "I am willing to pay." Xander pulled out a silver dollar and held it up. The young man's eyes widened slightly. That was good money for simple information. "What do you want to know, Clayton Garrett? Where does he live? Has he had any visitors in the last day or so? Maybe a woman arriving from Denver?" The young man's expression changed, becoming more guarded. "Mister, asking questions about Clayton Garrett is a good way to get hurt in this town." Xander pulled out another dollar. "I am not looking to cause trouble. I am looking to prevent it." The young man hesitated, then took both coins quickly and pocketed them. "Garrett lives in the big house up on the hill north side of town. You cannot miss it. White columns, fancy iron gate. As for visitors, I heard he was expecting his new bride to arrive yesterday, but the stage never showed. There has been some commotion about it, people out searching the road. Story is the stage was attacked." "It was," Xander said. "I found it, but there were no bodies, no sign of the passengers." The young man's eyes widened. "Then where are they? That is what I intend to find out." Xander handed over Copper's reins. "Take good care of her. I may need to leave quickly." He paid for a room at the hotel, though he had no intention of using it beyond storing his rifle and saddlebags. He kept his pistol on his hip, concealed beneath his coat. Then he walked back out into the growing morning light and made his way through town toward the north side. Clayton Garrett's house was exactly as described, a massive white structure that looked more suited to a southern plantation than a Colorado mining town. The iron gate was closed but not locked, and Xander could see guards stationed near the front door. Two men, both armed with rifles, watching the approach. He was too exposed here, too easy to spot. He needed a better vantage point, somewhere he could observe without being seen. He circled around, finding a path that led up the hillside behind the house. From there, hidden among the pine trees, he had a clear view of the back of the property, and that was where he saw her. The woman stood in a second-floor window, her hands pressed against the glass. Even from this distance, he could see the fear in her posture, the way she kept looking toward the door behind her as if expecting someone to enter at any moment. She was young, maybe 22 or 23, with dark hair pulled back from her face. She was beautiful in a classical way, but what struck Xander most was the intelligence in her eyes, the fierce awareness that even confined, she was not broken. This had to be Josephine Vale. He watched as she turned from the window and moved deeper into the room. A moment later, a man entered. Even from this distance, Xander recognized Clayton Garrett from descriptions he had heard. Tall, well-dressed, probably in his mid-40s, with the kind of cruel face that came from years of getting exactly what he wanted regardless of who it hurt. Garrett was talking to Josephine, gesturing as he spoke. Xander could not hear the words, but he could see Josephine's body language. She stood rigid, her arms crossed, her chin lifted in defiance. Garrett moved closer to her, and she stepped back. He reached for her arm, and she pulled away sharply. Xander's hand went to his pistol, every muscle in his body tensing. But Garrett did not pursue. Instead, he seemed to laugh, then turned and left the room. Xander heard the distinct sound of a lock turning even from his position outside. She was a prisoner. That much was clear. He settled down to watch and wait, his mind racing through possibilities. He could not just walk up and demand her release. Garrett owned this town, and any open confrontation would end badly. He needed to be smart about this, needed to find a way to get her out without starting a war he could not win. As the morning progressed, he observed the patterns of the guards. There were 4 total that he could see, rotating positions every few hours. They were professional, alert, not the kind of men who would be easy to slip past. The back of the house had a door leading to what looked like the kitchen, and he saw servants coming and going. The second floor where Josephine was being kept had a balcony, but it was a good 20 feet off the ground with no easy way to climb up. Around midday, he saw Garrett leave the house with 2 of the guards, riding off toward town. That left 2 guards, plus whoever was inside with Josephine. This might be his best chance. Xander made his way carefully down the hillside, staying low and using the trees for cover. He approached the back of the house, timing his approach for when the guard was at the far corner of the building. The kitchen door was unlocked, and he slipped inside as quietly as he could. The kitchen was empty, the cook apparently taking a break. He moved through quickly, finding the servant stairs that led to the upper floors. Every step seemed to creak and groan, and he moved with painful slowness, listening for any sound of discovery. The second-floor hallway was long and carpeted, with doors on both sides. He moved down it carefully, trying each door until he found one that was locked. This had to be it. He knocked softly. "Josephine Vale." There was a moment of silence, then a woman's voice, cautious and frightened. "Who is there?" "My name is Xander Morrison. I found your letter, the one you wrote to your sister. I am here to help you." Another pause. "How do I know you are not one of his men?" "You do not," Xander admitted, "but I am not, and I am your best chance of getting out of here." He heard footsteps approaching the door. "Can you open it? Give me a moment." He pulled out his knife and worked at the lock. It was a good lock, solid but not impossible. After a tense minute, he felt it give. The door swung open, and he found himself face to face with Josephine Vale. Up close, she was even more striking than he had thought. Her dark eyes met his with a mixture of hope and suspicion, and he could see the bruise forming on her left cheek. Anger surged through him at the sight. "Did he do that to you?" She touched her face self-consciously. "This morning, when I refused to put on the wedding dress he had brought for me." Her voice was steady despite everything. "Are you really here to help me?" "I am, but we need to move quickly." Garrett left the house, but he could return at any time. "There are guards everywhere." "I know, we will have to be careful." He looked around her room quickly. "Do you have anything you need to take?" "Just myself." She moved toward him. "Everything I had was taken when they brought me here." "They brought you? What happened to the stage?" As they moved quietly back toward the servant stairs, Josephine explained in whispers. "We were about 5 miles outside of Fairplay when men stopped the coach. They took me and let the others go after threatening them to say nothing. They brought me straight here. Garrett said the stage would be found eventually, that people would think it had been attacked by outlaws, that I had been killed or taken. No one would look for me because officially I never arrived." "Smart of him," Xander said grimly, "but not smart enough. That letter you wrote fell out during the attack. I found it." They reached the kitchen, and Xander peered out carefully. The guard was still at the far end of the house. "We need to move fast. Once we are in the trees, we will be harder to follow. Can you run in this dress?" She looked down at the elaborate day dress she was wearing with its long skirts and petticoats. "It is not ideal, but I will manage." "Good. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They burst out of the kitchen door and ran for the tree line. Xander heard a shout behind them, the guard finally spotting them, but they were already halfway there. Shots rang out, bullets kicking up dirt around their feet, but they made it into the cover of the pines. "Keep moving," Xander urged, taking her hand to help her over the rough ground. They crashed through the underbrush, moving uphill, away from the house. More shouts echoed behind them, and he knew the guards would be coming after them. They ran for what felt like miles but was probably only half that, Josephine's breath coming in gasps, her fancy dress torn by branches and brambles. Finally, Xander pulled them to a stop in a thick grove of trees, listening carefully for sounds of pursuit. "We cannot stop for long," he said. "They will be tracking us. Where are we going? My horse is at the livery in town. If we can get there, we can ride out. They will be watching for that. Garrett will have men at every road out of town by now." She was right, Xander thought quickly. "Then we go over the mountains, not around them. There are old mining trails that lead east. They are rough and not many people know about them, but they will get us away from Fairplay. Without supplies, without proper clothes." Josephine looked down at her ruined dress. "I am not complaining, but we need to be realistic about our chances." Xander admired her clear thinking even in this crisis. "There is an old mining camp about 3 miles from here, abandoned but probably still has some supplies. We can stop there, get what we need, then keep moving. Lead the way." They moved more carefully now, Xander using all his tracking skills to cover their trail where possible. He led them along rocky ground where their footprints would not show, through streams to break their scent. Josephine kept up without complaint, though he could see she was exhausted and probably in pain from running in those impractical shoes. The mining camp appeared after an hour of hard walking. It was indeed abandoned, several small structures slowly being reclaimed by nature. But one cabin still had an intact roof and door, and inside they found some old supplies. Canned goods, a few blankets, and most valuable of all, some men's work clothes that had been left behind. "Turn around," Josephine said. "What?" "I need to change out of this dress." "It is completely impractical. Those work clothes will do better." Xander turned his back, listening to the rustle of fabric. Despite the danger they were in, he found himself very aware of her presence, of the fact that she was trusting him completely even though they had just met. "You can look now." He turned to find her dressed in work pants and a flannel shirt, both too large for her but far more practical than the dress. She had torn strips from her petticoat and was wrapping her feet. "My shoes were ruined," she explained. "This will have to do until we can find proper boots. You are very resourceful." "I grew up on a farm in Missouri before my father decided to try his luck in Denver. I know how to make do." She looked at him directly. "Why did you come for me? You do not know me." "That letter was not even addressed to you." Xander sat down on an old crate, suddenly feeling the weight of the sleepless night and the morning's excitement. "Honestly, I am not entirely sure. I read your letter, and I knew what kind of man Clayton Garrett was, and I could not just ride away. Maybe I needed something to care about again. Maybe I just needed to do something right. Something right again." She sat across from him, watching his face. What happened? He found himself telling her things he had not spoken about in years. About his family's ranch in Texas. About how his parents had died during the war. About how afterward he had tried to hold onto the land, but corrupt officials and carpetbaggers had taken everything. About how he had been drifting ever since, unable to put down roots, unable to care much about anything. "So you see," he finished, "helping you, this is the first thing in 5 years that has felt like it mattered." Josephine was quiet for a moment. "I am sorry about your family, about your home. That is not right, what they did to you. A lot of things in this world are not right, like men who collect wives and discard them when it suits them. My father arranged this marriage, Josephine said bitterly. He was so proud of making a connection with such a wealthy man. When I tried to tell him about the rumors about Garrett's other wives, he said I was being hysterical, said I should be grateful. My sister Margaret tried to help, tried to talk him out of it, but he would not listen. So I wrote that letter to her, hoping that if something happened to me, at least someone would know the truth. Something almost did happen to you, still might if we do not stay smart. Then we had better keep moving. She stood, testing the makeshift wrappings on her feet. Which direction? They left the mining camp as the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky. Xander led them east, up into the higher country. The going was tough, the terrain rocky and steep, but they pressed on. He knew they needed to put as much distance as possible between themselves and Fairplay before nightfall. As they walked, they talked. Josephine told him about her life in Denver, about working as a teacher at a small school, about the books she loved to read. Xander found himself fascinated by her intelligence, by the way she saw the world. She asked him about his travels, about the places he had been, and he found himself opening up in ways he had not done in years. There was something between them, he realized. Some connection that went beyond the circumstances of their meeting. The way she looked at him, the way they fell into easy conversation despite barely knowing each other, it felt significant. It felt like something that could grow into more. They made camp that night in a small cave, sheltered from the wind. Xander built a small fire, keeping it low so the light would not be visible from a distance. They ate some of the canned goods from the mining camp, not speaking much but comfortable in the silence. "Thank you," Josephine said finally, "for coming after me, for believing my letter. Thank you for writing it, for fighting." She smiled at him, and in the firelight she was beautiful. "What happens now? Where do we go? East to Denver would be safest." "Garrett's influence does not reach that far. You have family there, right? Your sister, Margaret, yes, but what about you?" "I will make sure you get there safely after that." He shrugged. "I have no plans, I never do. You could stay," she said quietly. "In Denver, I mean, if you wanted." Their eyes met across the fire, and Xander felt something shift in his chest. "I could," he agreed. They sat together as the fire burned down, talking about everything and nothing, and somewhere in those hours, Xander realized he was falling for this woman. It was fast, maybe too fast, but after years of feeling nothing, the emotion was overwhelming. He wanted to protect her, yes, but more than that, he wanted to know her, wanted to be part of her life. The next day they continued east, moving through high country. The terrain was difficult, and Josephine's makeshift foot wrappings were not holding up well. By midday, he could see she was limping. "We need to stop," he said. "I can keep going." "I know you can. But you should not have to. Let me look at your feet." Reluctantly, she sat on a boulder and unwrapped the torn fabric. Her feet were blistered and bleeding. Xander felt a surge of anger at himself for pushing so hard. "We need proper supplies," he said. "There is a small settlement about 2 hours south of here, Leadville. It is rough, mostly miners and prospectors, but there will be a store where we can get boots and food. What if Garrett's men are there? They might be. But we do not have a choice. You cannot walk much further like this." They changed direction, moving south. Josephine insisted she could walk, but Xander could see each step was painful. After an hour, he simply picked her up, carrying her despite her protests. "Put me down. You cannot carry me all the way there. Watch me." She fell silent, but he felt her relax slightly in his arms. "You are a stubborn man, Xander Morrison. I have been told that before." Leadville was indeed rough, a collection of tents and hastily built structures clinging to the mountainside. Xander set Josephine down as they approached, and they walked in together, trying to look casual despite their disheveled appearance. The general store was small but well stocked. Xander bought boots for both of them, along with supplies for the trail, some proper clothes for Josephine, and ammunition for his pistol. The storekeeper looked them over with curiosity, but asked no questions, which Xander appreciated. They were just leaving when a voice called out behind them. "You two look like you have been through some rough country." Xander turned to find a man standing in the doorway of the saloon next door. He was older, maybe 50, with the weathered look of someone who had spent his life outdoors. Something about him seemed familiar. "Just passing through," Xander said carefully. The man studied them both, his eyes shrewd. "You would not happen to be running from Clayton Garrett, would you?" Xander's hand moved toward his pistol. "Who is asking?" "Easy there, son. Name is Robert Vale. I am looking for my daughter." Josephine gasped. "Uncle Robert." The man's face broke into a smile. "Josie, is that really you?" He crossed the street quickly, pulling her into a hug. "Thank God." "Margaret sent me a telegram saying she had gotten a message from a friend in Fairplay, saying the stage had been attacked but you had escaped with some man. I have been searching for you for 2 days. Margaret got word. But how?" The other passengers on the stage, apparently, were not as cowed as Garrett thought. One of them made it to Denver and reported what really happened. Margaret went to the law, raised hell until they listened. Garrett's got warrants out for kidnapping now, though I doubt they will be served any time soon. Man's got too much power. "They will be served," Xander said firmly. "Once we get Josephine somewhere safe and she can testify to what happened." Robert looked at him with respect. "You must be the man who got her out. Morrison, right? Margaret said that was the name from the telegram." "How did she know my name?" "The friend in Fairplay, whoever it was, saw you sneaking into Garrett's house. Apparently you were not quite as stealthy as you thought. But they kept quiet because they realized you were trying to help." "Thank God for small mercies," Xander said. They moved to the saloon, where Robert insisted on buying them a meal. As they ate, the full story came out. Margaret had indeed received word from a sympathetic resident of Fairplay, one of the house servants who had seen Xander rescue Josephine. The servant had taken a risk and sent a telegram to Denver, knowing Margaret would want to know her sister was alive. "Margaret wants you to come back to Denver," Robert said to Josephine. "She has a place for you to stay, and she has lawyers working on the case against Garrett." "I want to press charges," Josephine said firmly. "I want to make sure he cannot do this to anyone else." "It will be dangerous," Robert warned. "Garrett has a long reach. I do not care. This has to stop." Xander felt a surge of pride at her courage. "I will stand with you. I saw him lock you in that room. I can testify to that." "We all will," Robert said. "But first, let us get you back to Denver safely." They left Leadville the next morning, this time with horses that Robert had brought. The journey back to Denver took 3 days, following established roads now that they had backup. Robert proved to be good company, telling stories about the family and making sure Josephine knew she was not alone. But Xander noticed that Josephine kept looking at him, that whenever they stopped to rest or make camp, she found reasons to be near him. The connection between them was growing stronger, and he found himself thinking about what might happen after Denver, after the legal proceedings, after everything was settled. Denver in 1876 was a growing city, benefiting from the mining boom and the railroad connection. Robert led them to a nice boarding house where Margaret was waiting. The reunion between the sisters was tearful and joyful, and Xander hung back, feeling suddenly out of place. But Josephine did not let him retreat. She took his hand and pulled him forward. "Margaret, this is Xander Morrison. He saved my life." Margaret was a few years older than Josephine, with the same dark eyes and intelligent face. She took Xander's hand warmly. Thank you so much. I do not know how we can ever repay you." "No repayment needed," Xander said. "I am just glad she is safe. Stay for dinner at least. We have so much to talk about." The dinner turned into a long evening of conversation. Xander learned more about the Vale family, about how their father had died 6 months ago, leaving the sisters with very little. That was when the pressure had started for Josephine to marry well, to secure their financial future. Margaret, already married to a modest shopkeeper, had tried to help, but had not had the resources to stop the arrangement with Garrett. "I am just glad you are alive," Margaret said, holding her sister's hand. "When I heard about the stage, I thought the worst. If not for Xander, the worst would have happened," Josephine said quietly. The sisters insisted Xander stay at the boarding house, at least until everything was settled. He agreed, though he felt strange accepting such hospitality. He was not used to being around family, around people who cared. Over the next few weeks, the legal case against Clayton Garrett began to build. Josephine gave her testimony to lawyers, as did Xander. Other women came forward, servants from Garrett's house, people who had seen or heard things but had been too frightened to speak up before. The story made the newspapers, and public opinion began to turn against the mine owner. During this time, Xander and Josephine spent nearly every day together. He took her walking through Denver, showing her the parts of the city he knew from his travels. She introduced him to her friends, to her fellow teachers, and he found himself slowly being pulled into a life he had not imagined having again. One evening they walked along Cherry Creek as the sun set, the mountains visible in the distance. "What will you do after this is all over?" Josephine asked. "I do not know. I have been drifting for so long I am not sure I know how to stop." "You could stay here, in Denver." "And do what?" She stopped walking and turned to face him. "Be with me, if you want to." Xander's heart pounded. "Josephine, I have nothing, no land, no real prospects. I have been running from my past for 5 years. I do not care about land or prospects. I care about the man who rode all night to save someone he had never met. I care about the man who carried me when my feet were too injured to walk. I care about you, Xander." He reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I care about you too, more than I thought I could care about anything. But I am not sure I know how to be what you need. I need you to be yourself. That is all." They stood there by the creek, and Xander felt years of walls crumbling inside him. He had been so focused on what he had lost that he had never considered what he might find. But here was Josephine, brave and smart and beautiful, offering him something real. "I am not good with words," he said, "but I am falling in love with you. I have been since I read your letter." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "I have been falling in love with you since you opened that locked door." He kissed her then, soft and tender, and it felt like coming home after years of wandering. The case against Clayton Garrett took months to wind through the legal system. In that time, Xander found work as a security consultant for one of the mining companies operating out of Denver. His knowledge of the territory and his reputation for honesty made him valuable. It was not the ranch he had lost, but it was honest work, and it paid well enough to support himself. He courted Josephine properly, with dinners and dances and long conversations. He got to know Margaret and her husband, became part of their circle. He even started to make friends, something he had not bothered with in years. When the news came that Clayton Garrett had been arrested and was being brought to trial in Denver, where he could not influence the proceedings as easily, Xander felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Justice was slow, but it was coming. The trial was sensational, covered by all the newspapers. Josephine testified about her kidnapping and imprisonment. Xander testified about what he had seen. Former servants testified about the suspicious deaths of Garrett's previous wives. Financial records were produced showing bribery and corruption throughout Park County. In the end, Clayton Garrett was convicted on multiple charges including kidnapping, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His properties were seized, his mining operations shut down or sold off. "It is over," Josephine said as they left the courthouse after the sentencing. "It is really over." "It is," Xander agreed. "You are safe now." She looked up at him, her eyes bright. "So what happens now?" he smiled. "That depends. Josephine Vale, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" She laughed and cried at the same time, throwing her arms around him. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. They were married in the fall of 1876 in a small ceremony at Margaret's house with close friends and family in attendance. It was nothing like the elaborate wedding Clayton Garrett had planned, and that was exactly how Josephine wanted it. Simple, honest, filled with love. Xander wore his best suit, uncomfortable in the formal clothing but willing to endure it for this. Josephine wore a simple white dress that Margaret had helped her make. When they exchanged vows, Xander's voice was steady and sure. He promised to protect her, to cherish her, to be the man she believed he could be. After the wedding, they moved into a small house on the edge of Denver. It was not much, but it was theirs. Xander continued his work with the mining company and Josephine went back to teaching. They built a life together, day by day, learning each other's habits and hopes and dreams. In the spring of 1877, Josephine told him she was pregnant. Xander was terrified and overjoyed in equal measure. He had never imagined being a father, never thought he would have the chance. But as Josephine's belly grew and he felt the baby kick under his hand, he found himself eagerly anticipating this new chapter. Their son was born in October, healthy and loud. They named him Thomas after Xander's father. Holding his son for the first time, Xander felt tears on his face. This was everything he had thought he had lost the right to have. Family, home, purpose. "He looks like you," Josephine said from the bed, exhausted but smiling. "He has your eyes," Xander replied, "and hopefully your brains." "He will have your courage," she said, "and your heart." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Thomas grew quickly, a curious and energetic boy. Xander found himself promoted at work, given more responsibility and better pay. They moved to a larger house, had a second child, a daughter they named Rebecca. Then another son, Samuel. Years passed, good years filled with the ordinary joys and struggles of family life. Xander taught his sons to ride, taught his daughter to be strong and independent. Josephine taught all of them to read and think and question. Together, they built something that lasted. On their 10th anniversary, Xander took Josephine back to the spot by Cherry Creek where he had first told her he loved her. It was evening again, the sun setting in shades of gold and orange. "You remember?" he asked, holding her hand. "I remember everything," she said. "I remember reading about finding the letter, riding all night. I remember being so scared and then you were there. I am still here." "I know." She leaned against him, comfortable and content. "I was thinking about that letter I wrote to Margaret. If I had not written it, if it had not fallen out during the attack, if you had not found it. But I did find it, and I am grateful for it every single day. My sister still has it, you know, the letter. She keeps it in a frame, says it is proof that miracles happen." Xander thought about that, about how a single piece of paper, words written in desperation, had changed everything, had brought him back to life, had given him love and family and a reason to stop running. "Maybe it is," he agreed. "Maybe it is proof that when you call for help, sometimes help comes." They stood there as darkness fell, watching the lights of Denver come on, knowing their children were safe at home with Margaret babysitting, knowing that tomorrow they would return to their normal lives, to work and school and the everyday business of living. But for this moment, they simply stood together, grateful for the series of chances and choices that had brought them here. By 1890, Xander had risen to become a partner in the security firm he had joined. His reputation for integrity and competence had spread throughout Colorado, and he consulted on operations from Denver to Leadville to Fairplay. The irony of working in the town where he had rescued Josephine was not lost on him. But by now, Clayton Garrett was just a memory, the man having died in prison 5 years into his sentence. Their children were growing up strong and independent. Thomas, at 13, already showed signs of his father's steady character. Rebecca, at 11, had her mother's sharp mind and had announced her intention to become a lawyer. Samuel, the youngest at 9, was still finding his way but showed a talent for art and drawing. Josephine had stopped teaching when Rebecca was born, but she had not stopped educating. She tutored neighborhood children for free, ran a lending library out of their home, and was active in the women's suffrage movement that was gaining strength in Colorado. Xander supported her completely, proud of her passion and conviction. On a spring evening in 1890, the whole family gathered for dinner. Margaret and her husband were there, along with their 3 children. Robert Vale, now in his 60s, regaled the younger generation with stories of the old days. It was loud and chaotic and full of love. After dinner, as the children played in the yard and the adults sat on the porch, Margaret pulled out a familiar piece of paper, now yellowed with age and preserved behind glass. "I was thinking about this today," she said, holding up the framed letter. 14 years ago, it seems like another lifetime." "It was another lifetime," Josephine said, taking Xander's hand. "We were different people then." "Not so different," Xander said. "You were brave then and you are brave now. I was lost then and you helped me find my way." "You saved me first," Josephine pointed out. "You saved each other," Margaret said softly. "That is what love does." Young Thomas came running up to the porch. "Father, can you tell us the story again, about how you and Mother met?" Xander looked at his son, then at his other children who had gathered around, then at Josephine. She nodded encouragingly. "Well," he began, settling back in his chair. "It was the summer of 1876, and I was riding south from Leadville to Denver. I came across an overturned stagecoach in the middle of the road, and there in the dirt was a letter." He told the story, with Josephine adding details here and there. The children listened with wide eyes, even though they had heard it many times before. It never got old, this story of chance and courage and love. When he finished, Rebecca asked, "But why did you do it, Father? You did not know Mother. You could have just kept riding." Xander considered the question carefully. "I suppose I could have. But there are moments in life when you have a choice. You can turn away from trouble, keep yourself safe and uninvolved, or you can step forward, even when it is hard, even when the outcome is uncertain. Your mother's words in that letter, they called to something in me that I had thought was dead. They reminded me that I was more than my past losses, that I could still make a difference. So I rode all night because it was the right thing to do, and in doing it, I found everything I had been looking for without knowing I was searching." Josephine squeezed his hand. "And I found the man I did not know I was waiting for." As the evening wore on and the stars came out, the family slowly dispersed. Robert dozed in his chair. Margaret and her family headed home. The children were put to bed, protesting that they were not tired even as they yawned. Finally, Xander and Josephine were alone on the porch, sitting in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had shared years together. "You ever wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently?" Josephine asked. "If you had not found the letter, or if you had found it but decided not to come?" "Sometimes," Xander admitted, "but not with regret. I believe things happen the way they were meant to happen, I was supposed to find that letter. I was supposed to ride to Fairplay. I was supposed to meet you. Fate, maybe, or maybe just luck. Either way, I am grateful. She rested her head on his shoulder. So am I. They sat together as the night deepened, two people who had found each other against the odds, who had built a life and a family and a future. The letter that had started it all hung on the wall inside, a reminder of how much could change in a single day, how courage could be found in desperate moments, how love could bloom in the most unlikely circumstances. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. The children grew up and made their own ways in the world. Thomas became a civil engineer, working on projects throughout the West. Rebecca did indeed become a lawyer, one of the first women to practice in Colorado. Samuel opened an art gallery in Denver, showcasing Western artists. Xander and Josephine grew older together, their hair turning gray, their steps slowing but their love never diminishing. They had arguments, as all couples do, and difficult times when money was tight or health failed. But they always came back to each other, to the foundation they had built that summer of 1876. In 1910, on their 34th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the house. All three children were there with their own families now. Thomas had married a teacher and had 4 children. Rebecca had married a fellow lawyer and had 2. Samuel had married late but was blissfully happy with his artist wife. The house was full of grandchildren running and playing, 3 generations gathered under one roof. Xander stood on the porch, watching the chaos with deep contentment. He was 63 years old now, his body bearing the marks of age and hard work, but his mind was clear and his heart was full. Josephine came to stand beside him, moving a bit stiffly from the arthritis that had settled in her joints. She was 56, her dark hair now streaked with white, her face lined but still beautiful to him. "Look at what we made," she said, gesturing to the family gathered in the yard. "Look at what came from that one desperate letter." "You made this," Xander said. "Your courage, your strength. I just helped along the way." "We made this together," she corrected. "Everything we have, we built side by side." Rebecca came out with a package wrapped in brown paper. "Mother, Father, we have something for you." The whole family gathered as Xander unwrapped the package. Inside was a leather-bound book, handmade and beautiful. He opened it to find it was full of family history, stories and photographs and memories. On the first page was a copy of Josephine's letter, the original still framed and hanging inside. "We wanted you to have a record," Thomas explained, "of our family, of where we came from, so that your great-grandchildren and their children will know the story." Xander felt tears in his eyes as he flipped through the pages. There were photographs from their wedding, from each child's birth, from holidays and ordinary days. There were written stories, memories recorded by each of the children about growing up. There were recipes in Josephine's handwriting, advice and wisdom passed down. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you." The celebration continued late into the night, full of food and laughter and love. When everyone finally left and the house was quiet again, Xander and Josephine sat in their bedroom, looking at the memory book together. "We have been very lucky," Josephine said. "We have been very loved," Xander corrected. "That is better than luck." She closed the book and set it aside, then took his hand. "When I wrote that letter all those years ago, I was so frightened. I thought I was going to die, that no one would ever know what had happened to me. I never imagined that someone would find it, would care enough to help. I certainly never imagined I would find love in the middle of that nightmare." "I was not living before I found your letter," Xander said. "I was just existing, running from ghosts and pain. You gave me a reason to stop running. You gave me a home." "We gave each other a home," she said. That is what marriage is, I think. Two people creating a place where they both belong. They went to sleep that night holding hands, as they had done for 34 years. Life continued its steady march. Xander retired from the security firm in 1915, handing over his partnership to a younger man he had mentored. He spent his days working in the garden, playing with his grandchildren, and writing down his own memories to add to the family book. Josephine's health began to decline in 1918, the arthritis worsening and her heart growing weak. But she remained sharp and engaged, still tutoring children who came to the house, still advocating for women's rights and social justice. When women finally won the right to vote in national elections in 1920, she celebrated as if she were young again, casting her first ballot with tears of joy. On a summer evening in 1922, sitting on the same porch where they had spent so many evenings together, Josephine looked at Xander with sudden seriousness. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. When I am gone, do not shut down. Do not go back to being that man who was just drifting. Stay connected to the children, to the grandchildren. Keep living. Josephine, do not talk like that. I am 70 years old, my love. We need to be realistic." She squeezed his hand. "You gave me 46 beautiful years. You saved my life in every way that matters. But you have more living to do. Promise me." "I promise," he said, his voice breaking, "but I do not want to imagine life without you. You will not have to imagine for a while yet. I am too stubborn to leave before I am ready." She was right about that. Josephine lived another 8 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1930 at the age of 78. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives she had touched. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn and remember. Xander felt her loss like a physical wound. After 54 years of marriage, of waking up next to her every morning, of sharing every triumph and tragedy, her absence was overwhelming. But he kept his promise. He did not shut down. He stayed involved with the family, helped his children and grandchildren however he could, continued to tend his garden and tell his stories. He lived 5 more years, long enough to see another generation born, long enough to know his family was strong and thriving. On a fall morning in 1935, sitting in his favorite chair on the porch with the family memory book open in his lap, Xander Morrison quietly passed away at the age of 88. His children found him there, looking peaceful. The book was open to the first page, to the copy of Josephine's letter. His hand rested on it, as if even at the end, he was reaching back to that moment in 1876 when everything changed. The funeral was held in Denver, attended by 4 generations of the family that Xander and Josephine had created. Thomas, now 60, stood to speak. "My father once told me that there are moments in life when you have a choice," he began. "You can turn away, or you can step forward." He chose to step forward, to ride all night to save a woman he had never met because it was the right thing to do. In doing so, he did not just save my mother. He saved himself. He found love and purpose and family. He found home, and he gave all of that to us. Thomas held up the original letter, still preserved behind glass. This letter, these desperate words my mother wrote in fear, became the foundation of everything we are. It reminds us that courage matters, that kindness matters, that sometimes the smallest acts can change everything. My parents taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice, made every day. They taught us that family is built through commitment and care. They taught us that it is never too late to start over, to find your way home. He paused, looking around at the gathered family. We are my parents' legacy. Every one of us exists because my father found that letter and chose to act, because my mother was brave enough to fight for herself. because they found each other and built something that lasted. We honor them by living with the same courage and love they showed, by being there for each other, by stepping forward when others need help, by building homes in our hearts where love can grow. After the funeral, the family gathered at the house one last time. It would be sold, the children having their own homes now, but they wanted this final night together in the place where so many memories had been made. Late in the evening, with children asleep and only the adult grandchildren still awake, Rebecca stood and raised a glass. "To Grandma and Grandpa," she said. "To the letter in the dirt. To the ride through the night. To the love that saved two people and created all of us. May we be worthy of their legacy." "To Grandma and Grandpa," everyone echoed. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when the body is done, Xander and Josephine were together again, watching over the family they had built, satisfied that their story had ended well. The letter that had started it all was passed down through the generations, along with the memory book and the stories. Each generation adding their own chapters, their own love stories, their own moments of courage. But it all began with a letter in the dirt, with words that called out for help, with a man who chose to ride all night because it was the right thing to do. It began with two people who found each other in the darkness and built a light that still shone, generations later, in the faces of their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And that was the greatest legacy of all.